Okay, today I'm going to be doing a repair on this 2008 CanAm Outlander 400 XT Max. So it's the two-seater. And the problem I'm having is, feels like this thing's got a two-speed transmission. And I don't mean high or low. I mean when I'm in high, I'm driving along about 30 miles an hour, all of a sudden the bike will lunge forward and the RPMs will drop. So it actually feels like it's shifting gears. So obviously it's in the clutch somewhere, so I'm going to take it apart, show you how to diagnose it, and what you're going to need for parts. So first of all, to get to your clutch on this 400, unfortunately you got to take out this little wheel well plastic, because you can't get the cover off the clutch at least easily without doing that. So I've done that, taken the cover off, and this is where I'm at. Now the first thing you have to be aware is your primary bolt here is reverse threaded. So be very careful. If you try to take it off, normal, you're actually going to be tightening it and you could break this bolt. So it's actually going to come off reverse threaded. And I believe there's around 70 foot-pounds of torque on this when you put it together. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this bolt out. Okay, and you're going to have a couple little washers that come with it. And I'm just going to pull this whole thing off as one because I'm trying to do this one-handed. All right, so what you've got is you're going to have the half of the primary comes off. The other half stays on the bike. So if you're familiar with a Polaris, it's different on a Can-Am. You actually just have half of it come off. And then you got your spring here that comes off. So I'm just going to set this down and show you what's inside. So the next thing you have is I guess a spring retainer. Basically it lets a spring sit in there and kind of a cover for your one-way bearing. So we're going to take that guy off. All right, now here's the one you want to be really careful with. This is your one-way bearing. Don't just grab it and pull it off. And the reason is this thing has a couple of these inside of it. This is a little cap. I'll show you close. So it's got a hole here where that spring sits inside, and then it's got a flat cap on the other end. And if you pull this thing off, I guarantee you they're going to shoot all the way across the other side of your garage, and you're going to have a heck of a time finding them. And don't ask me how I know, right? So you want to be careful. You're going to use two hands. One hand's going to kind of rotate this thing counterclockwise to take it off. The other hand's going to reach behind here as you slowly do that, and you're going to catch those little pins as they snap out. And then you can take this off and pull those pins out. Now this is your one-way bearing, and there's actually two bearings, right? There's one on the inside, there's one on the outside. I don't know if I can catch the number on here, but I have replaced mine with some better bearings. I can't even remember the company. You can find them online once you look up the number. If I can't catch it here on the video, I'll try to put it in the comments. But the reason I did that is, what happens when these Can-Ams, the transmission on these things are straight cut gears. They're not the helical cut gears. So they don't like to go in and out of gear real easy. You actually have to kind of rock the bike to put it in gear and rock the bike to put it back into park. And it gets worse over time. And the reason is, most of the time it's this one-way bearing here. These bearings will start to, when they start getting old, they kind of get some drag on them. They don't spin as free as this one does. And because of that, when you're sitting here with it idling, the belt's going to be down on this one way. You're going to have a little bit of tension, which is going to put tension on the secondary into the tranny, and it doesn't want to switch gears. So you want this thing to spin the best you can. Replacing the bearings real easy. You're going to take it out. You're just going to knock these out with a punch and tap in the new ones. So they're real easy to replace, but you want to get the ones out there that are just as smooth and slick as you possibly can. Now, those pins that we talked about down here, that's what gives you your engine braking. So they run inside of this hole here. So if I show you what one looks like, you're actually going to have the spring in here and the little cap in here, right? And that's how they're going to sit. And also, when you go to put them together, you got to use your hand to hold both of them in as you slide that one way over. And so it's an advantage to have small hands to be able to do this. But those pins are going to ride inside this groove here. You can see that. So that's what you heard earlier on the video. As I spun the one way, you heard a snapping sound, and that's the pins going in and out of those grooves. because that's what's gonna give you the engine brake. When the primary or the secondary is trying to overrun the primary, those pins kind of catch on this, lock it to the primary, locks it to the shaft, and then, you know, uses the engine as a brake. So that's really important that you service this thing, and that's why I say service this one way every time you change the oil, and your clutch will thank you for it. Now this bike's got, I don't know, over 6,000 miles on it, probably closer to 6,500 miles on it, and the clutch is still in pretty good shape. It's original, so all I've done is serviced it outside of what I'm showing you today, and again, putting these new bearings in. Now, what are you going to use in here? You got to use a lubricant in here, and you do not want something that is going to get hot and turn to liquid, because if you do, it's going to go all over your clutch, and it's going to ruin your belt and have a bad day there. So CanAm sells this stuff. I think it's called something like IsoFlex, or I don't know. It's ridiculously priced. It's like $50 for a little bitty tube of it. I mean, it might last you a lifetime, but it's still, it's just crazy. And then you got to try to find it. So instead, what I've been using is brake caliper grease. So just got a tube of that from the auto parts store, and what's good is it handles high heat. It's a good lubricant, and since I service this thing, you know, even if I had the IsoFlex, I'd be servicing this every time I change the oil. So it does fine. Like I say, I have 6,000 miles, never had a problem, works great, hasn't worn anything out. So, you know, I could easily recommend using that, works fine. All right. So what I'm going to show you is what the problem is with my clutch. And we take this primary over to the bench, and we will take a look at exactly what went wrong with it. So again, if you've got this shifting problem, when you get this clutch over here, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take it apart, and that's simply pull the top off, flip it over. And what you'll have is you'll have some rollers, and the 400 only uses 4 rollers instead of all 6. You have to go to like the 650 to get a bike that'll use all of them. And then on this side of here, what you have is you have these little weights, or fingers if you want to call them. And I'll try to get in here, take a real good look at mine, and I think you can see this on camera that I've got some grooves that have actually worn in mine. Okay, now the reason that those grooves wore in there was because some of these rollers started hanging up. So I've got one of the old rollers here. If you take a look at the pin that went in the roller, you can really see how that pin has worn. So what was happening is this roller wasn't able to do its job. It would roll a little ways and then kind of hang up. And since I ride this bike, a lot of times I'm riding, you know, 25, 30 miles an hour. Basically, the clutch fingers are coming out to about here, and they're just kind of hanging there, barely moving. So I got those rollers, which aren't rolling, sitting here just wearing on these fingers, and that's what they did. Now, I have actually sanded these down one time, about maybe 2,000 miles ago. I sanded these guys down, which really smoothed it back up, and it was good to go, but I really should have paid more attention to where the problem was, which was in the roller. So what I'm doing today is I'm going to replace all 4 rollers and pins, and I'm also having to replace these 4 fingers. Now, it's pretty easy to replace these. What you need is, I'm just using a socket that happened to be the exact size, and I'm able to put that socket right here up against the pin, get the pin started to knock it out, just use a small hammer. And then I took this, which is the exact size, I think it's 1/4 inch, will fit perfectly through that hole, and you can drive that pin all the way out, and there's no slop. So that's nice that they made it the perfect size for that. Knock them out, start the new pin, put the roller on, and you're good to go. Now the other thing CanAm wants you to do is, if you look on the clutch, they actually give you two little boxes here. They want you to put a mark in every time that you replace these rollers. And I think what they're saying is, hey, by the time you replace these rollers 3 times, it's time for a new clutch. The problem is you can't find this clutch anymore. So everywhere I've been, they basically say they're discontinued, you know, can't buy them. You'll have to find something aftermarket. So, you know, you're gonna wanna take care of this clutch the best you can. But if you've got that shifting problem, this is where it is. It's in these fingers, and it's in those rollers. Now the other problem that you're going to find that you have is when you start taking a close look at the face of your clutch here, you're going to find a ridge right about here. And that's what was happening. The belt was coming up, kind of hitting that ridge, getting stuck. You know, the fingers were at that right spot where they were stuck. And then when you got about 30 miles an hour and you had so much more RPM into it with more pressure, it finally would jump up over that groove and you'd kick into high gear. So what I did was I took some 800 grit sandpaper and I block sanded this whole thing. And I got this real smooth. And I did the inside as well and also the secondary, because every one of them are going to have that groove from riding in that same spot. So when you service your clutch, make sure you check this out, that you don't have this groove. And if you do, you know, try to sand it out of there as soon as you can, and that'll help keep your clutch smoother. The other thing is, obviously, you know, drive around in low gear once in a while, you know, where you get that belt to ride all the way up and all the way down. That'll help, because if you're always driving at the same speed, you know, this is one of the side effects you're going to get. So lastly, what I'm going to do once I get this all put back together, and again, I'm going to use this brake caliper grease. This is what I'll put in the one-way. And then I'm going to take acetone and I'm going to scrub down these clutch faces really well, because just from sanding, I don't know if you can see it on my hand, but they're already shiny. So there's a lot of metal coming off just from going around this clutch, and you want to get as much of that cleaned off so that it doesn't get embedded in your belt. Other than that, it's just reverse the procedure. I guess I should have mentioned, hopefully you know this, anytime you take a clutch apart for any reason, right? When it's sitting in this fashion, make sure you mark where the top and the bottom go together so you can put it back in that same pattern. Lastly, I will mention real quickly these little buttons, right? These little buttons are gonna ride right up against where you've got your rollers, one on each side. And you can see they actually ride here on the clutch face. Now mine have just a slight wear. I could feel a little bit of a ridge, but this clutch is still very usable. So if they've really worn in here, you can try to sand that out a little bit, but again, that's going to give you a wider gap, and it's going to create some chatter in that one-way or that primary for you. So you want to try to avoid that if you can. Worst case, you know, like I said, you gotta go trying to find a clutch, but these are getting kind of hard to find. All right, so if you got any questions, put them down in the comments. I'll try to answer them, but remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next.